My name is Meredith Voss. I used to be the one who made magic happen. I was the artistic director of one of the most renowned theater troupes in the city, known for daring productions and molding actors who went on to win awards. I had it all: the applause, the headlines, the community that felt like family. They called me a visionary, someone who could turn the impossible into a standing ovation. The world once saw me as the heart of the stage, an artist who brought dreams to life. That was before the light faded. Now, I'm sitting alone in the corner of a small, dimly lit apartment, clutching a cheap cup of coffee that's gone cold. The silence is so loud it echoes through my bones. I no longer hear the thunderous applause or the hum of excitement in the green rooms. There are no more actors running up to me for guidance or casting calls. No more late night rehearsals filled with adrenaline. It's just me now. I used to have purpose. Now I'm invisible. My children were once the stars of my productions, young faces full of hope and energy. They knew every corner of the theater, every line of dialogue, and every secret the stage held. I coached them. I molded them. They were a part of my art, my world. But now they avoid me. When they speak of me, it's always in hushed tones, as if I'm a shadow, something to be wary of. They talk about delusions and mental breaks. I can hear it in their voices when they mention me, the uncertainty, the judgment. It wasn't always this way. They used to love me, look up to me. I could hear the pride in their voices when they introduced me to their friends. This is my mom, the director. There was a time when they saw me as someone to admire. That was before they forced me out. They said I needed rest, that I wasn't well, that I needed to be somewhere stable, as if I was broken. It hurt in ways I couldn't express, but I didn't fight them. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. I thought they'd come back for me. I thought they'd realize the mistake they were making, that this was all temporary. They'd want me back. I was certain of it. I packed my things quietly, letting the moment pass without protest. I thought it would just be a few days, maybe weeks, and they'd see the truth. But now it's been months. They haven't called. I glance around the tiny apartment I now call home. The walls bare, the furniture sparse. It's not a place for someone who used to be someone. I can't help but wonder what my life has become. How did I go from being the woman who commanded the stage to being forgotten like a name that was never meant to last? And yet, part of me still believes they'll come for me. They have to, right? They have to realize they made a mistake. The phone buzzes beside me, breaking my train of thought. A message from my son, Jamie. It's just a simple, "Hey, no, I miss you. No, how are you doing?" Just a simple, detached, "Hey." The text is a knife to my chest. He hasn't asked to see me in months. I stare at the screen for a long moment. My fingers hover over the keys, wanting to say something, anything, but I don't. I just put the phone down, unsure of what to do next. I can't say when the numbness fully set in, but by the time the weather turned cold, I had stopped counting the days. Time bled into time until it didn't matter anymore. I drifted from one place to the next, just another person trying to disappear into the shadows. The streets where I once walked with purpose, on my way to the theater, on my way to change lives, now felt alien, like they belonged to someone else. I found myself wandering through old art districts, half-forgotten rehearsal spaces where the echoes of my past work still seemed to hum in the walls. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of the name of a play we'd once staged, a production that made headlines, and for a split second, I'd feel something, a faint spark. But that spark would flicker out just as quickly as it came. I spent hours in the cold, sitting outside theaters that had closed their doors for the season, hoping maybe I'd find an old program or a flyer that might remind me of the person I used to be. I scoured trash bins, not out of desperation, but because I couldn't help myself. It felt like the last shred of connection to my former life, the life I had poured my soul into. But it wasn't enough. The memories, the scraps, they were just reminders of a world that no longer saw me. One afternoon, I stumbled across a pop-up puppet show outside a small cafe. The sign said it was for kids, but something about it caught my attention. Maybe it was the sound of the audience laughing or the bright colors on the stage. I didn't know, but I stood there, just watching for a while, lost in the simple joy of it all. A little boy, no older than 5, ran up to me, holding out a cup of hot cocoa. "Here you go," he said, grinning. I was startled at first, but I smiled back. "Thank you," I said, grateful for his kindness. Just as I took the cup, the boy's mother appeared. Her face twisted with alarm as she grabbed him by the arm and yanked him back. "Don't talk to her," she hissed, her voice sharp. "You don't know her." I felt my face flush, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. She didn't even look at me as she hurried him away, muttering under her breath about how some people just couldn't be trusted. I stood frozen, the cocoa warming my hands but doing nothing for the chill that settled deep in my bones. Before I could process what had just happened, a street security guard approached me. "Hey, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but firm. "You can't hang out here. Someone reported you for panhandling." "I wasn't panhandling," I protested, but he didn't seem to care. "They said you were asking for money," he replied, grabbing my arm as if to guide me away. "We've had complaints." I opened my mouth to argue, but what was the point? I had no rights anymore. No place in this world, it seemed. So I let him lead me away, my thoughts drifting back to the little boy with the cocoa, to the brief moment when I had felt seen. But that feeling was gone now. And I couldn't help but wonder, as I walked away, whether anyone would ever see me again. I had never thought I would end up here, in court, sitting alone, no one by my side, no one to fight for me, not even my children. It was a small case, petty charges, really. They said I had been disruptive, that I had caused a scene. I didn't even remember what I had done wrong. I had been wandering the streets, trying to fill the emptiness with whatever scraps of my former life I could find. Maybe I had spoken too loudly or too passionately about a memory I couldn't hold on to. Maybe I had stumbled too close to someone's idea of normal. Maybe I had become a ghost in the city's eyes and they just wanted to banish me. The courtroom smelled of sterile paper and cold, indifferent air. I looked around, noticing the faces that were nothing but a blur to me. A judge behind a high desk, his face hidden in shadows. Lawyers sitting on either side, their suits pressed neatly, their demeanor sharp. They were all here to move on with their lives, to decide my fate like I was a small inconvenience in their day. But what hurt most was that no one was here for me. Not a single familiar face in the crowd. The prosecutor was a man who barely looked up from his notes as he spoke. "This woman," he said, his voice dry, "has been reported for multiple disturbances in public spaces, a transient with erratic behavior. She doesn't have a permanent address. She's been a public nuisance. This case is a matter of ensuring she is properly placed into a program that can help manage her behavior." He barely glanced in my direction as he spoke, as if I was just another piece of paper he had to get through before moving on to the next case. My heart beat heavy in my chest, but I tried not to show it. I could feel the weight of my name in the air. Meredith Voss, a name that once meant something, a name that used to make people turn their heads in excitement. But now, it was nothing. My public defender, a young woman with messy hair and a bored look in her eyes, didn't seem much more interested. She glanced at me briefly, flipping through a stack of papers before mumbling something about rehabilitation programs. My mind drifted. I thought of the theater, the productions I had staged with such love and care. I thought of the actors I had mentored, the careers I had helped shape. Some of them had won awards, had their names in lights. I had been a part of that world. I had been someone who mattered. But now, I was nothing. I shifted in my seat, but as I did, something caught my eye. The judge had paused in the middle of reading his notes, looking down at something in his hands. Then, without warning, he glanced up at me, his gaze steady and piercing. "I know you," he said, his voice surprisingly soft. For a moment, I didn't understand what he meant. "You do?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. The judge nodded slowly, his face now filled with recognition. "You're Meredith Voss," he said, his voice growing clearer. "You directed the Shakespeare in the Park productions years ago, didn't you? I was in one of them." The words hung in the air. The courtroom seemed to freeze for a moment, and I could almost feel the pulse of the past, of the woman I used to be, coming back. I wasn't invisible. Not entirely. The judge's eyes softened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something. Respect? Recognition? "You directed my first role," he said, his voice softening even further. "I was the lead in Macbeth. I've never forgotten it. You gave me a chance when no one else did." I blinked, shocked. It had been so long since anyone had mentioned those days. My breath caught in my throat, and for a brief moment, the weight of the years seemed to fall away. This wasn't just a random judge. This wasn't just some stranger. This was someone I had helped. The prosecutor seemed confused by the exchange, glancing between us, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. "I want to look into this woman's case more thoroughly," the judge said, his voice firm but not unkind. "She deserves more than just to be tossed into some program without consideration." There was a small ripple of surprise in the room, but no one spoke. The prosecutor stammered for a moment, but the judge cut him off. We're adjourned for now. I'll review this case personally. Meredith Voss will not be dismissed as a transient without proper consideration of her history. And just like that, something shifted. For the first time in what felt like years, someone had seen me. Really seen me. I wasn't just a nameless face. I was Meredith Voss, the woman who had once shaped lives, who had once been respected in a world I had given my heart to. As the room emptied and I was escorted out, my steps felt lighter. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Maybe someone still remembered. And that, in itself, was enough to give me a flicker of hope. The courtroom was quiet when I was called back in. The judge had asked for a brief recess, and I had spent that time pacing in the narrow hallway, trying to convince myself that the recognition I'd received earlier hadn't been some fluke. I wasn't foolish enough to get my hopes up completely, but a small part of me, the part that used to dream of big stages and sold-out shows, dared to believe that things could be different. When the door opened, I walked back in with a little more confidence than I had before. The judge sat at his desk, his gavel resting beside him, his face thoughtful as he glanced at the file in front of him. The prosecutor was sitting with his arms folded, looking as disinterested as he had when he first spoke about me, like I was a mere nuisance. But the moment I stepped into the room, the judge lifted his head and gave me a small nod. Meredith, he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom, I've had time to review your case. I sat down, waiting, heart pounding, but trying to keep my exterior calm. My mind raced, though. What did this mean? Was he just going to let me go, or was this part of some plan to help me? He glanced at the prosecutor before turning back to me. I've pulled some records, he said. You were a respected figure in the arts. The National Theatre Association, Shakespeare in the Park, and a number of other productions. These are not the hallmarks of a transient, Meredith. These are the actions of someone who has contributed greatly to this community. I blinked, my chest tightening as a wave of emotion hit me. The judge continued, flipping through pages in front of him, each document a piece of my past that he was now bringing into the light. I found a number of recommendations for you, from actors who you mentored to production crews who admired your leadership, and it appears that your current situation is not the result of any lack of ability or merit. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. It appears, from what I can gather, that you have become invisible to the world, forgotten even by the very people who once applauded you. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but there was something else behind them, something that lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't delusional, I hadn't just fallen into some abyss on my own. I had been pushed out, forgotten, erased. But this, the judge continued, leaning forward, is not the end of your story. It's just a shift in the narrative. I barely registered his words at first. It wasn't until the sentence sunk in that I realized what was happening. The judge wasn't just acknowledging my past. He was telling me there was still a future to be had. I've spoken with the National Theatre Association, he said, pulling up a separate sheet of paper. And after reviewing your case, they have agreed to support you, Meredith. They'll be working with you to find a rehabilitation program tailored to your skills and history, one that respects the contribution you've made to the arts. They've offered you a mentorship opportunity as well, a way to guide the next generation of artists who may not even know your name but should. I sat there stunned, not entirely sure I had heard him right. For a moment, everything around me seemed to fall away. I hadn't been forgotten. I hadn't been abandoned. The world hadn't fully closed its door to me. He cleared his throat, looking over at the prosecutor. This case will be reassigned, the judge said firmly. Instead of penalizing Meredith for whatever erratic behavior she's been accused of, we will help her. She will be placed in a program that can bring her back into the world where she belongs. The prosecutor didn't argue. He gave a quick nod, seemingly caught off guard by the shift. The judge turned to me again, his expression warm but serious. Meredith, I'm placing you into this program. They will help you get back to where you were. But I need you to help yourself too. Take this opportunity. Do not waste it. Do you understand? I nodded, my throat tight. I understand. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like someone saw me, really saw me. Not just the woman I was now, but the woman I used to be, the director, the mentor, the visionary. As I stood to leave the courtroom, the weight of my past, the silence, the judgment, started to feel a little lighter. Maybe this wasn't the end of the story after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of a new chapter. And this time, I was going to make sure it was one worth telling. The next few days were a blur, but something began to shift in me. The courtroom had been a turning point, but the real change started when the local culture blog picked up my story. It wasn't much at first, a short piece from a freelance writer who had been at the hearing, but it quickly gained traction. The headline read, "The Forgotten Director: How the Stage Lost Meredith Voss." I wasn't sure what to think when I first saw it. It was strange seeing my name again, not in a way that made me cringe or reminded me of everything I'd lost, but as part of something larger. The piece was respectful, compassionate even, and I realized as I read it that this writer saw something I hadn't in a long time, a potential. Not just for me, but for others who had been left behind by the world they once shaped. And then it happened. The messages started rolling in. At first, they were small, simple. "I was an actor in your last production. You changed my life. I remember your direction in The Tempest. Thank you for giving me a shot." They were from people I hadn't seen in years, some I'd forgotten even existed. But soon they grew in number and depth. Former colleagues, people I had mentored, even strangers moved by the article began reaching out. One message led to another, and soon I found myself caught in a web of people who remembered me, who remembered what I had done. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was part of something again. I spent hours reading through them, each one a small thread in the tapestry of a life I had forgotten I was part of. I responded where I could, offering thanks, sharing memories, and accepting their kind words with the same humility that had always kept me grounded. And then, the donations started coming. It wasn't much at first, small amounts from people who had seen the blog, wanting to help me get back on my feet. But then, an old theater company reached out to me, offering a guest mentorship opportunity. They wanted me to help guide a new class of young directors to pass on the legacy I had once built. I couldn't believe it. They wanted me, they saw me, and they thought I had something to offer. As the days passed, the offers and messages kept coming. I found myself slowly rebuilding, not just physically, but emotionally. I hadn't realized how much I'd been starving for human connection, for validation that I mattered. It was coming in ways I hadn't expected. But there was more. A part of me, the part that had always felt like I wasn't enough, had assumed I would never be seen again, that I was destined to fade into obscurity. The world had moved on without me, and I would just have to accept that. But now, here I was, surrounded by people who didn't just recognize my past, but were eager to help me shape my future. The validation came in the form of actions, not just words. A donation for my living expenses here, an invitation to speak at an industry panel there. Even local students reached out to me, asking for advice or guidance. They didn't know me as the director who had once ruled the stage, but they knew me as someone who could teach them something. And that, I realized, was enough. One evening, as I sat in the small shelter I had been calling home, scrolling through another wave of messages, I felt it. The first real glimmer of hope. It wasn't some sudden rush of joy, but a quiet certainty, a feeling that I was not done yet. There was more to my story, more to my life. The applause had faded, but the work hadn't been in vain. I had built something. I had mattered. And now, slowly, the world was beginning to remember. The next morning, as I walked to the local coffee shop to meet with a former actor turned playwright who had reached out, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Excitement. There was still work to do, still a legacy to reclaim, but this time I was going to do it on my terms. The ripple effect of recognition had begun, and it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt invisible. Everyone who had worked tirelessly, often without reward or applause, only to be forgotten. We were all still here, and now it seemed the world was ready to see us again. The blog had opened a door, but it was up to me to walk through it. And for the first time in a long while, I was ready to do just that. The knock on the door was tentative, unsure, like the person on the other side wasn't entirely convinced they should be there. I glanced at the clock. It was late afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip below the horizon. My first instinct was to ignore it, to continue my quiet evening in the shelter I had been calling home. But something stopped me. I opened the door slowly, my heart lurching in my chest when I saw who stood there. It was Jamie, my son. His hands were shoved awkwardly in his pockets, and his eyes were downcast, as though he wasn't sure how to meet my gaze. His face, once full of the warmth and trust of a child, now seemed older, more worn. He looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. The small space between us felt like miles, even though I could reach out and touch him if I wanted to. Mom, he said softly, his voice unsure. I, uh, I wanted to come by. Is it okay? I stood there for a moment, unsure of how to react. I hadn't seen either of my children in months. I hadn't spoken to Jamie since the day he'd told me I needed to rest, that I wasn't well, and that I needed to leave. He and his sister had been the ones to push me out, to label me as unstable. But now, here he was, standing in front of me, looking as lost as I felt. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in, my heart beating faster than I could explain. Of course, I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Come in. He hesitated for a moment, but then walked through the door, his footsteps heavy on the worn floorboards of my temporary home. I closed the door behind him, the weight of the moment settling in. We both stood in awkward silence for a few beats before I broke it. How's your sister? I asked, my voice softer than I had intended. I wasn't sure if I should dive right into the past or ease into it. She's fine, he muttered, his eyes not quite meeting mine. She wanted to come too, but she didn't think it was a good idea. My heart twisted at the thought of how far we had drifted. My daughter Emma had been the first to push me away, to label me as delusional when my behavior began to change. I never blamed her, not entirely, but the way they had turned on me still stung. Jamie shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Mom, he said, his voice low. I didn't know what to think. We didn't know what to think. You seemed different, but I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have just pushed you out like that. His apology hung in the air, heavy and laden with the years of silence we'd endured. I didn't know how to respond, didn't know if it was enough to hear him say it. The words I had wanted for so long were finally here, but now that they were, I wasn't sure they would make the wound heal. I know you were just trying to help, I said slowly, forcing the words through the lump in my throat. I know you were, but I wasn't who you thought I was, and I wasn't ready for any of it. Jamie looked up at me then, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in so long, regret. It was like he was seeing me for the first time in months, the woman who had once been so much more than just Mom. I was wrong, he said softly. I'm sorry. I've been thinking about it a lot, about everything, how we treated you. He paused, running a hand through his hair, the gesture familiar. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if I can, but I want to try. I don't want you to be alone anymore. I didn't know what to say. I was afraid that if I said too much, I would ruin the fragile bridge that was slowly beginning to form between us. But as I looked at him, I realized something important. This was the beginning, not of a perfect reconciliation, not of everything going back to the way it was, but something new, something better. You don't have to fix everything, I said softly, my voice shaky. I'm not asking for that, but I need you to understand something. I'm still here. I'm still your mom, and even though everything's changed, that hasn't. Jamie nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. He was trying, and I was trying too. We weren't there yet, but we were both willing to try. Just then, the silence was broken by a soft knock on the door. I looked at Jamie, who shrugged, his expression unreadable. I stood up slowly, uncertain of who it might be. But when I opened the door, I didn't expect what I saw. Emma was standing there, hesitant, her face drawn in uncertainty. She looked at Jamie first, then at me. Her eyes searched my face for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe understanding, but whatever it was, she didn't know how to ask for it. Can I come in? She asked quietly. I swallowed hard, not knowing what to say at first. This was it. My children were here, together, and despite everything that had happened, despite the years of silence and hurt, they had come back. They wanted to try. For the first time in months, I stepped aside, allowing them both to enter the space I had made for myself, uncertain but hopeful. I didn't know what this would look like, what they would think of me, what I would think of them, but I was ready to find out. As they stepped inside, Jamie and Emma exchanged a quick glance, and for a brief moment, I saw it. The smallest hint of the family we had been before, when things weren't so broken, before everything had been so complicated. It was fragile, this moment, but it was a beginning, and maybe that was enough. The house felt different than I remembered. It wasn't just the fresh coat of paint or the new furniture that had replaced the worn-out couches from years ago. It wasn't even the faint smell of fresh flowers in the entryway, or the small decorative touches that screamed new beginnings. It was the absence of something that used to fill the walls with warmth, a warmth I could no longer feel. I stood just inside the doorway, my hands cold by my sides, the silence wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. I hadn't been back here since they made me leave. The house I had once built with my family, the place where my children had grown up, where I had lived and breathed every moment of my career. This was it, wasn't it? And yet, something was missing. The energy had shifted, and I wasn't sure I could find it again. I glanced back at Jamie and Emma, who had followed me inside. They didn't speak, not at first. They were just there, standing in the hall, as if waiting for something to unfold. For a moment, I thought of the house we used to have, the dinners around the table, the chaos of my rehearsals spilling into every corner, the laughter that used to echo through the hallways. I thought of the nights when we'd all curl up together on the couch to watch a movie, even if we'd argued about which one to pick. That was before. Now, everything felt still. Every corner was untouched, sterile in a way I couldn't quite explain. The paintings were gone, replaced with new abstract pieces that seemed out of place. The family photos I had cherished were no longer there to greet me as I entered. It felt like walking into someone else's life, not my own. I can't believe how much it's changed, Emma murmured, almost to herself. I turned to her, unsure of what to say. She was right, though. It had changed. The house felt like a reflection of us, of all the things we had once been and lost along the way. I used to stand right here, I said, my voice sounding far away, and listen to your dad playing piano late at night. Jamie glanced at me, his expression unreadable. What happened to it? He asked, his eyes scanning the room. I didn't have the answer. The piano had been sold when we moved, along with everything else that held any significance. The furniture, the memories, gone. It wasn't just the piano, I said quietly, almost to myself. It was everything. The people, the moments, the life we had here. Emma nodded but didn't say anything. I could see the discomfort in her posture. She was tense, like she was trying to fit into a space that no longer fit her either. For a brief second, I saw the little girl who had once run around this house, always full of questions, full of life. But now she stood here as an adult, unsure of how to navigate this space, this house that had been stripped of everything that had once made it home. I stepped deeper into the living room, trying to shake the feeling that I was intruding on a life that no longer belonged to me. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable. I hadn't been invited back. I had left, thinking they'd come for me. But now I realized, in this moment, that my return wasn't a welcome one. It wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about finding what was lost. It was about reclaiming something I had once built. Something I had forgotten was mine. Without realizing it, I walked toward the kitchen. There was an old chair by the window where I used to sit and watch the rain, a place where I could think and breathe. I used to make dinner there every night. Now it was just a cold, empty space, the counters barren, the stove unused. I sat down in the chair, the cool wood against my skin, and closed my eyes. For a moment, I let myself feel the weight of the years, the silence, the absence of the noise that had once filled this house. Mom? Jamie's voice broke through the quiet, and I opened my eyes. He was standing in the doorway, watching me carefully. I'm fine, I said softly, though I wasn't sure if I believed myself. I think we should go upstairs, Emma suggested gently. I'm sure there's still stuff there, stuff that's ours. I nodded, standing up from the chair. Yeah, I guess it's time to see what's left. The three of us made our way upstairs, the floor creaking underfoot like it had before. My heart pounded as I reached the top of the stairs. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but the hallway felt even colder than downstairs. I stopped in front of my old bedroom, the door half open. The room was unrecognizable. There was no trace of the art I'd hung on the walls, no trace of the books I had collected, or the papers scattered across the desk where I had spent hours writing, thinking, planning. It was all gone, just a blank space now. I stepped inside, unable to stop myself from reaching out and touching the wall, as if I could reclaim it with my fingers. I thought I would come back to something, I said softly, more to myself than to them. Something that felt like mine. Jamie came up beside me, standing in the doorway. It's still yours, he said quietly, his voice uncertain. It's just different. I let out a breath, unsure of what to say. The room wasn't just different, it was erased. The people who had lived here, who had once filled this space with laughter and love, were gone. And in their place, there was nothing. I don't know if I can be the person I was, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not in this house, not in this life. Emma reached out, placing her hand on my shoulder. We don't expect you to be the same, we just want you back, in some way. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to be the person I had been. I wanted to be the woman who commanded a stage, the woman who knew exactly who she was. But standing here in a house that felt like a ghost of the past, I wasn't sure how to find her again. I glanced at my children, at the two of them standing there waiting for something, maybe for me to lead them back to what we once had. But I couldn't promise them that. All I could offer was this: I was still here. I wasn't gone. And maybe that was enough. I turned away from the room, the weight of the past heavy on my shoulders, but I kept moving forward. It wasn't about reclaiming the past. It was about finding a way forward. We walked down the hall together, my children beside me, not quite ready for reconciliation, but willing to take the first steps. And that, I realized, was all I needed. One small step at a time. Maybe that was all any of us needed. The evening of the small theater event arrived, and I wasn't sure what to expect. The venue was modest, a small local theater tucked away in a corner of the city, the kind of place where the seats creaked and the lights felt just a little too bright. But it was perfect. It wasn't about grandeur or fame. It was about a community of artists coming together to honor something bigger than any one person. And tonight, they were honoring me. I stood backstage, staring at the old, worn curtains that had once been the backdrop to countless performances I had directed. The smell of the stage, the dust, the wood, the anticipation felt familiar. It was a scent I hadn't realized I missed until now. Tonight wasn't about me reclaiming my old glory. It wasn't about the accolades I used to get or the recognition I thought I deserved. It was about accepting the journey, the ups and the downs, and realizing that even after everything, I still had something to offer. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I turned, surprised to see the young writer from the blog, the one who had written the article about me. She smiled brightly, her enthusiasm radiating despite the small size of the theater. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me be a part of this, she said. I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I just wanted to say that it's an honor to see you take this step. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Thank you for believing in me, I said, my voice shaky, for giving me a chance to remind people who I was and who I still am. She nodded, her eyes reflecting a deep respect that caught me off guard. You've always been more than the world has seen, she said, her voice soft but firm. I think they're about to see that again. I nodded, unsure of what to say. This wasn't about fame, it wasn't about applause, but standing here in this small theater with people who had come together to honor me, I realized something. My work had made an impact, my life had mattered, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as forgotten as I had believed. As she left to join the others in the audience, I stood there for a moment longer, collecting myself. Then, when I felt steady enough, I walked out onto the stage. The applause that greeted me wasn't overwhelming, but it was steady and warm. People had come here tonight not for a spectacle, but to witness something real. The crowd wasn't filled with stars or famous faces, but with local actors, writers, and people who appreciated the craft. And in their eyes, I saw the truth. They weren't applauding my past. They were applauding my presence, my resilience, my refusal to let go of what was still inside me. I stood at the center of the stage, my hands shaking slightly as I grasped the microphone. I looked out at the audience, seeing some familiar faces and some new ones. I thought of all the people I had helped, all the lives I had touched, and all the ones who had touched mine. It was a moment of quiet recognition, a moment of peace. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, I began, my voice strong despite the tremor I felt inside. I spent a long time thinking that the best part of my life was behind me. I thought I had nothing left to give, nothing worth offering. But tonight, looking at all of you, I realized that I was wrong. The work isn't over. It never will be. I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I've always believed that the stage is where we find our truth, where we show who we really are. And I spent so many years hiding from my own truth, thinking that the applause meant everything. But it doesn't. What matters is that we keep going, that we keep creating, that we keep believing in what's possible. There was a brief silence before the audience broke into applause again. It wasn't loud, but it was sincere. And for the first time in a long time, I felt it. Not as the director of a big theater, but as someone who had just shared a piece of themselves. I didn't need to explain my past, my failures, or my struggles. I didn't need to ask for forgiveness or redemption. This moment, this stage, was mine in a way I hadn't known it could be. The applause wasn't for some past accomplishment, it was for the person I was still becoming. The writer who had first told my story introduced me to the audience. She was young, bright eyed, and full of hope. Her words were simple, but powerful. Meredith Voss changed the landscape of theater in this city. She still can. We've all been lucky enough to see it. As she spoke, I realized something. It wasn't about the awards or the recognition that I once craved. It was about the people who remembered me. The people who had seen my impact, my work, and my heart. And for them, that was enough. As I left the stage that night, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. Not just to a stage or an audience, but to the world. And that was enough. When I walked backstage, I was met with a round of applause from the crew and the actors who had come to watch. It wasn't about my past or my mistakes. It was about me standing there in front of them, still fighting, still creating. And that, I realized, was the most powerful thing of all. The future wasn't as uncertain as it once seemed. I didn't need to chase what was lost. I just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. The curtain had closed on one chapter, but the next one had already begun. The transition from theater director to mentor wasn't easy, but it was necessary. As the weeks passed, I found myself being pulled deeper into a new rhythm, one that felt both unfamiliar and comforting. The rehabilitation program offered by the National Theater Association had given me a second chance to contribute, to create again. But this time, it wasn't about making headlines or throwing myself into massive productions. It was about something smaller, quieter, a chance to guide others. The program was designed for displaced creatives, those who had fallen through the cracks, those like me who had once been a part of something great, but had found themselves struggling to find their place again. I was assigned to work with a small group of young directors, writers, and actors, each with their own struggles, their own reasons for being in this program. Some had been out of work for years. Others were dealing with personal crises that had derailed their careers. They weren't the shiny, polished versions of the artists I had mentored in the past. They were raw, unsure, and filled with the kind of uncertainty I had once known all too well. At first, I didn't know if I could teach them anything. How could I? What could I possibly offer when I had been lost for so long? But as I spent more time with them, I realized that my struggles, my story, wasn't something to be hidden away. It was something that could help them. It wasn't just about directing or writing, it was about resilience. It was about the belief that you could start over, that you could take something broken and make it whole again. One afternoon, we sat in a small sunlit room at the back of the community theater. There were 6 of us, myself, 3 young directors, 2 aspiring playwrights, and 1 actor. We were talking about a new script one of the playwrights had written, a work about identity, about being lost in a world that doesn't understand you. The piece spoke to me in ways I didn't expect. It was as though the playwright had captured the very essence of my own struggle. I don't know if it works, the playwright said, looking down at the pages in front of him. It feels messy. Unfinished. I leaned forward in my chair, the same way I used to lean in with my actors when they were struggling. The messiness is where the truth is, I said, my voice calm but firm. Sometimes when something feels unfinished, it's just because you haven't found the right place to finish it yet. The mess is the starting point. Don't run from it. The room went quiet for a moment, and I could see the others reflecting on my words. I had said this before, many years ago, to a young actor who was having trouble with a scene. It wasn't about perfection, it was about finding the truth in the chaos, in the vulnerability. I think we've all been there, I continued, my eyes scanning the group. We've all felt lost or stuck or unsure. But that's when the most powerful work happens, when you allow yourself to be messy, to not have all the answers. You trust yourself, and you trust your craft. One of the young directors, a woman named Sarah, looked up at me, her expression thoughtful. But how do you trust yourself when you've lost everything? How do you keep going when you feel like you're just invisible? Her question hung in the air. It was the one I had asked myself so many times. I took a deep breath before responding, searching for the right words. You start by recognizing that you're still here, I said softly. Even when it feels like you've lost everything, you haven't. You're still here, and that's something worth holding on to. It wasn't an easy answer. It never was. But as I looked around the room at the faces of these young creatives, I saw something shift in them. It wasn't just about the work or the project we were discussing. It was about the way they were starting to see themselves differently. They weren't just lost artists. They were people with stories to tell, with experiences to share. And they didn't have to be perfect. They didn't have to have it all figured out. They just had to keep moving forward. The meeting ended, and as the others packed up to leave, Sarah lingered behind. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't think anyone would understand. But you do." I smiled, the weight of her words settling deep inside me. "I do, and that's why I'm here, to help you find your way, just like someone helped me once." As she walked out of the room, I sat there for a moment, reflecting on the journey I had taken to get here. I had spent so many years feeling like I was no longer relevant, no longer part of the world I had built. But now, here I was, passing the torch in a way, teaching others what I had learned through my failures, my struggles, and my small victories. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of something again. Not the grand productions or the glittering accolades, but something deeper, something real. This was where I belonged. This was my new stage. And in helping these young artists find their voices, I was finding mine again. The future wasn't clear, but I was no longer afraid of it. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose, of direction. And that was enough. The small, modest room I now called home was quiet. The kind of quiet that felt comforting rather than oppressive. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the faint rustle of the wind outside, and the distant sound of a car passing by. It was a silence I had come to appreciate, even if it had taken me a long time to get here. I sat by the window, the first light of morning spilling gently through the glass, casting a soft glow across the room. It wasn't much, just a bed, a small desk, and a chair, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. I looked across the room at the shelf where I had placed an old stage prop, an intricately carved mask from a King Lear production I had directed years ago. It was worn, chipped in places, but still beautiful. I had found it in a box of old theater memorabilia I'd unpacked the week before, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I had placed it on the shelf as though it were a relic from a past life. Now, as I sat there staring at it, I realized something profound. I had always believed that my purpose in life was to be a director, to create, to guide, to mold. But now, as I looked at the mask, I saw it in a new light. It wasn't about what I had created in the past. It wasn't about the shows, the accolades, or the applause. It was about the truth I had always tried to reveal on stage. The truth about who we were, who I was. I stood up, walking over to the shelf where the mask rested. As my fingers traced the edges, I thought back to my husband's parting words to me, before he left all those years ago. "You don't direct for applause. You direct so the truth has a voice." His words had always stuck with me, even when I didn't want them to. He had been right. I hadn't directed for the applause, even though I had craved it. I hadn't directed for the recognition, though I had often wanted it. I had directed because it was a way for me to give others a voice, to show the world the truth of who they were, whether they knew it or not. It was never about fame. It was about impact. And now I realized that the truth had a voice in me too. I sat back down by the window, the mask resting gently in my hands. For a long time, I had believed that I was a woman who had lost everything: the career, the family, the recognition. But I was starting to see that I hadn't lost it all. The world had tried to erase me, tried to silence me, but I was still here. I was still standing. The truth wasn't gone. It had never left me. It was in the work I was doing now, in the small group of young artists I was mentoring. It was in the way I was helping them find their voices, just as I had once helped so many others. As the sunlight filtered through the window, casting a warm glow across the room, I placed the mask back on the shelf. I didn't need to hold it anymore. It was a part of me, just like everything I had been, everything I had done. The applause didn't matter. The recognition didn't matter. The truth mattered. And I had found it again, in the most unexpected place. I stood up and walked over to the small desk where I had set up my computer. The next chapter was waiting for me. There were scripts to read, young artists to mentor, projects to plan. The world had moved on, and so had I. But this time, I wasn't moving on in search of applause or validation. I was moving on because I knew who I was, and I was ready to share that truth. As I opened my email and began to type a response to a new invitation to mentor a young director, I felt the weight of the past settle into its rightful place. It was a part of me, yes, but it didn't define me anymore. I wasn't the woman who had been erased. I was Meredith Voss, the director, the mentor, the woman who had always fought for the truth, even when it was hard to find. And for the first time in years, I wasn't fighting to be seen. I wasn't fighting to be heard. I was simply living the truth of who I was. The light from the window grew brighter, and I smiled, feeling the warmth of it deep within me. The past was behind me, and the future, whatever it held, was mine to shape. The truth had a voice again, and I was ready to speak it,